again taken over this channel, and as we continue to guide you through the lands of darkness, we may find that anyone can become more. The Making by StoryMan-Jack. The 16-year-old boy was thrust down onto the cold, wet dirt of the jungle. He had looked around at the armed men in black tactical gear and wondered just where the hell they were going. The gag they had tied around his head and mouth had come out from between his cracked and bleeding lips as a surprise. A metal plate landed between his legs. A couple of slices of bread and some kind of mismatched slop landed on the ground. A plastic spork placed into his hands, and he looked up at the gruff man who held a gun on him. He held up his hands, bound. "Hey, you expect me to eat like this?" The man growled. "I don't expect nothing. I was told to give you food. How you get it down your useless throat, that ain't my problem, kid." "Well," the boy said, "if I'm so useless, why the hell did you take me in the middle of the night and I find myself in the jungle the next day?" The man laughed and then slapped him in the back of the head. "Next day, son? Man, you've been out of it. Eat or not, I don't care. You can figure out how to do it with your hands tied or with your mouth gagged. So if you don't shut it, I don't much care if you eat it all." "Fine," the kid said. "Fine," and held up his hands again. He figured out a way to start shoveling what was left of the slop into his mouth, with his arms and back bending awkwardly so that he didn't spill any more of the food upon the ground. For some reason, he was starving. Otherwise, he wouldn't have even touched the bread. Just as he put the last bite of bread into his mouth, a voice called out, "Mount up, gentlemen. We got 2 more clicks, according to our guide here." The boy was jerked up by his shirt collar. Well, not his shirt collar, the shirt collar they made him put on after they bundled him out of the orphanage in the middle of the night. They continued to drag him down the trail in the jungle at a quick trot. "You sure we need this kid, boss?" The same man that had fed him opined as he hit the boy in the legs to get him to pick up the pace. "Shut it!" Voice from somewhere in front yelled back, voice sharp and quick, brooking no discussion. "Schiller, the kid's gotta be here, and that's really all you need to fucking know. The doc says he matches the DNA sample we were provided. You don't get paid to think anything else. Make sure he gets there and he's breathing." "Sir," the man replied, the response just as sharp and short, ending the entire matter. The kid got drug along, his dirty black hair falling into his eyes as he stumbled through the jungle in a sweat-filled haze. Having had enough, finally, he stopped and jerked his arms back, yanking the rope out of the man's hand. "I can walk by myself, you know. I don't need some slug dragging me," he said. The man who had been pulling the rope tied to his hands glared at him. "Who forgot this asshole's gag?" he asked. From behind, another hand clamped down on the back of his neck, and it was actually large enough to wrap all the way around the kid's throat. "Kid," the voice said, "how old were you?" 15 last Halloween," he said. "Well," the voice growled, squeezing the kid's neck a little more. "Sweet fucking 16, he laughed. "Today's Halloween, little girl, and if you want to make it to tomorrow, shut it and move along." "What?" the kid asked, his face confused. It had been a week since he was kidnapped, but he thought he'd been kidnapped not the night last night. His head began to swirl. "Today's Halloween, kid. You've been drugged up and out of it on an airplane for about a week. Hope you make it through to celebrate something." "Make it through what?" the kid demanded, his face flushed, and not just because his circulation was being cut off by the man. "Just," the voice growled low in his ear, the heat of his breath tickling the boy's flesh, "shut He squeezed more. The kid's vision began to blur. He squeezed even harder, and the kid's blur became a darkening tunnel. Fuck. The man held him there at that space of infinite time between waking and the deep dark of oblivion. Up. And he was thrown forward to land sprawling in the damp, rotting muck of the jungle floor. Oh! Another voice called from far ahead in the trail. Well, look at that. The bearded man who had been squeezing his neck and thrown him growled down at his form sprawled on the ground. Did you make a birthday wish or something, kid? He walked over the kid's body toward where he had heard the call. Not stepping on him, but not really bothering to try not to step on him either. Looks like we found the temple. Temple? The kid thought, but didn't dare open his mouth. He'd figured he'd pushed the man far enough for one day. The thing about it was, the kid had always wanted to go on an adventure, to be like the people he read in his precious books, the only escape he had from the dead, drudgery reality of being an orphan in the city. His love of reading led him to the idea of free thought. He didn't really like school, but he spent every waking moment he could in the library every time they let him, on the internet or researching through books. He just loved to figure things out. As he was drug on along, the entrance to, he wouldn't have described the places as a temple or a building or a house or even a hut. It was more like a cave. And it occurred to him that he had likened what he thought this temple should have been with synonyms for homes. And it made him nervous, though he didn't know why. It was a cave, though squared off for sure, and with carved drawings over the top of the entrance, but nothing more than a black hole in the side of a mountain to the boy. Even as he pulled his lanky form up, the same soldier, there was nothing else he could call these people, picked him up and forcibly carried him to the front of the armed convoy. A man stood there with an open book looking up at carvings, and then turned to the two other men who stood to either side of him. Is that the kid? And even as the men moved toward him to take custody, Bach held up his hands and began walking on his own slowly toward them, as if giving himself over without issue. The man obliged and just moved in beside him as they walked in to the blonde-haired man with glasses and the book. All right, Professor, the man on Bach's said. We are here and we have the kid you insisted we needed. The man paused. Now what? Well, we'll need light, the man said. But the script says enter and choose key or test. That's it? Look, Professor said, this stuff is the oldest written language we know, mixed with the second oldest written language we know, and a code. I have no idea if that's all, or if there's more in the temple. We'll need to go in to translate whatever we find, but it sounds like I was right about the kid. Those markings up there, that's his DNA sequence. The professor had two lead soldiers enter the cave, and even as they did so, glow sticks guiding their way, other men lit torches perched back at the strange little town of grass huts where they'd landed in the helicopter after he had waken up on the plane. The cave was indeed something more than just a natural hole in the ground. It was a hall that led to a large open worship chamber of some kind, a doorway in the back leading deeper into the mountain. Its wooden door long ago rotted away. The men all looked at the professor, who was frantically scanning the book, flipping through pages erratically and then scanning more. Long moments passed before the man who was obviously in charge demanded, "Doc!" in a sharp tone. "Just a minute," the nervous man said, wiping sweat out of his eyes. "There is a long walk before us, and it is 100% trapped. For us not to have all the information, we can get across it. Bach looked around, his nylon ropes around his wrists loosening enough for him to be able to jerk his hands free if he needed to. And then he found, looking around, that he was the very last thing on anyone's mind. This would be his only chance, and he knew it. No matter what anybody said, whatever these people wanted from him, once they got it, they were going to kill him, and he knew it. 16-year-old loner, orphan, class clown, and certified genius did the stupidest thing then that he'd ever done, arguably. And the stupidest thing he would probably ever do. He ran. Across the trap floor to the door. The only path that held even the slightest chance at escape for him. He ran, hoping that he would get across without a trap going off, and the other men could not. "No!" voices called behind him as he ran across the stone floor, but he continued to run. Once through the archway and the door in the back, he stopped to turn to look back at the men, his breathing coming in raspy, hoarse wheezes. All the men. The professor, the military men, everyone stood shocked for a moment, and then the leader shrugged and moved forward toward him. The man's foot clicked as it stepped on a stone halfway through the rubble-strewn floor, and the man stopped. The kid had seen Indiana Jones loads of times. Someone had donated a box set of the first trilogy, after all, to the little orphanage, and they'd worn the discs completely away. That sounded to him like a trap, just like it would have been in an indie movie. The look that came over the man's face in the gloomy firelight and soft yellow glow, however, was one that no human face was designed to make. The sheer terror in the expression was not only plain, but screamed in a voice of high-pitched death, not unlike a banshee's. It was then Bach, the kid, saw what had caused the man to make that look, and he prayed that he could look away, that he could tear his eyes away from that disgusting monstrosity of evil. But those prayers went unanswered, and what he saw towards the man almost broke his mind, and did break the soldier frozen by absolute yet simple fear. And he just waited, stood and waited for his death, eyes rolling up into the back of his head as he was chomped down upon. The creature, monster, demon, whatever you would call it, the kid had no words. Nothing in his short yet arguably eventful life had prepared him to put a label on something so foul. When human beings use the term evil, they have a certain concept of what that means. That for most people, evil is logical. It has a motive. So it is something that is done that is morally wrong or bad by the rules of general society. But those people would be wrong. And that doesn't even come close to describing what true evil is. Yet Bach understood that. He understood it in a very personal and straightforward way. And this was what he would have said evil was in that moment. The frozen glimpse into something so black that it ate, devoured light itself. And in the absence of everything, he understood it. The form was a combination of mist and gel. It undulated like gelatin at times, and rose or wafted softly like heavy fog on an early fall morning. It was black, yet the word black did not describe what the boy saw, nor did it describe the feeling he felt from it. It was black and dark and deep, empty space, and it hungered. And it was a bottomless reservoir of that aching hunger, throbbing hunger, the hunger of light and of life itself. The thing dripped and floated, oozed and shifted its way toward the statue-like man. Long tendrils of mist formed, slowly at first, and then more rapidly toward the soldier. Everyone locked, unable to do much but watch in horror. As they continued to form into a shape of long, tar-like claws, Bach felt the need to scream. An absolute, gibbering, mentally retarded child that would remain in his place if this being of utter hunger and chaos turned its attention to him, would be drooling for the rest of its life. First one, then another of the claws pierced that frozen soldier's head, both spiritually and figuratively, or physically, going into it through the soft spots of the skull at its temples. The soldier, his eyes no longer rolled back in his head, but wide and filled with terror exploding in their minds and their sockets, and he fell to the mossy rubble-strewn floor, lifeless. The other soldiers began to run, but this would not save them. The horror shot little spores from its tar-like claws. The moldering, festering things flew like arrows pointed at targets, and once impacted, the resultant spread of a tar-like substance began eating away at its victims, the men, the rough soldiers, and they felt every heart-achingly painful second of it. For he heard every desperate, disparaging, and soul-crushing scream, every involuntary intake of breath to feel collapsing lungs, and the continuation of one scream, nay, a wail so gut-wrenchingly painful that it told only of infinite misery. So the boy, little real experience other than that of a reader of fantastic tales, turned and ran blindly in the dark corridor, slammed into one wall at an end, and figured out it was a corner, turning hard left and kept just running, not conscious of the act as his lungs burned and he threatened to pass out before it stopped. When the fear faded enough for him to come to himself, he found that he was in a lighted room, a dais, empty but glowing in the center, and an old man seated at a table having tea, completely unconcerned with anything that was going on near vicinity, as he should be, like a horror devouring soldiers in the next room over. The kid's face grimaced at the old man, but he just smiled. "We have to do something. Those men." The old man, surprised, let his smile come back and said, "Why do you take pity on those that took you in the night, without your permission, knowledge, or authority to do such a thing?" "Because they're people," the boy said, "and I have to admit that my concern is mostly for myself, because I can now do nothing but visualize what happened to them happening to me." "That's a good answer," the man said and waved his hand. "Have a seat. What about the guardian?" "He doesn't even see you." "How's that?" "Because Viet Bach, or, if you will, the book, you are the key. Soon the gate will open the way to comprehension and understanding. Some petty guard dog isn't going to pit its meager strength against that." Who are you?" Bach's voice was slow and measured, impressively calm for a teenager. "I am," the old man said, and then deliberately took a drink of his tea. The kid leaned back exasperated. "Yeah, that's what I'd like to know. Who the hell are you?" he asked again. He locked eyes with the kid and said again, "I am," and then stopped and waited. "Is this a guessing game or something?" the kid asked. The old man shook his head and, "Look, I just want to know where I am and what's going on and how I can get back." "Get back to what?" the old man interrupted. "An orphanage, your hustle in the street, your library?" "Well, I admit it isn't as glamorous as hiding out in a cave in the unknown jungle somewhere, but wait, how did you know all that?" "Oh," the old man said, moving around and turning the teenage boy as he did so that the pedestal that was once empty stood before him with a plain brown leather-bound book set upon it. "The same way I know that those kids you look out for," And I know you could help so many more, he continued. What's that? Buck asked, eyes narrowing at the book in front of him. That is knowledge, the old man said. Well, what kind of knowledge? Buck asked. The old man was quiet for a time, and then his voice grew grave as he said simply, all of it. What do you mean, all of it? I mean, all of human knowledge is contained therein, if you know how to unlock it. Well, yeah. Any warnings then before I grab this thing you're offering me out of the sheer coincidence that I showed up today? I mean, before I pick it up. No, my son, the old man said with a smile. You'll have no needs for warnings in a moment. Bach, having a suspicious nature, moved to step back and away from the old man. Well, wait just a minute, he said. The old man waited patiently. How do I know it isn't a test or a trap? He asked. The old man silently waited. I'm going to have it to turn you down, I think, he told the old man. I mean, if you could just tell me how to get to the nearest, what do you call it, town, village, hut, complex? All you crazy creeps can fight and die over a book if you would like. I'm going home. You truly do not want to know? The old man asked. The boy eyed the book for long moments. Yeah, I want to know. But there are a lot of things I want to know. But you know what? No one gives you that kind of power. All human knowledge? Are you kidding me? No one can be gifted with something like that. I've known that since I was a little kid. Yes, you have, the old man said, shaking his head. And I know you can't be gifted with such a thing. The kid almost shook with frustration. How could you possibly know? I've never seen you before today, and I don't even know where on the planet I am, much less who the hell you are. I've even lost a week somewhere. I know because I know. And you are correct, young Buck, or Book. No power can be gifted. This power is not a gift. It is a burden, and meant for a very specific type of person. And yes, you'll have to take it, and you'll have to master it with your own will, and you will be tested. What do you mean, specific person? How many other people are going to be looking for their book? Bach asked. The specific person is you, young Bach. The kid's face grew pale. Wait a minute. Take the knowledge and you will understand. Nothing can harm you. I have your word, the kid asked. Does my word matter? The old man asked, and then the kid knew just what it was that bothered him about the old man. Why do you keep asking me questions you already know the answers to? The kid shot back. Just because I know your answers does not mean you do not need to hear the question before you formulate them, young man, he responded. It is called teaching. The book called to him. It did. It reached out and grabbed his awareness and locked it down. He really wanted to know what all this was about, why he was there, and why that information in that book was so important. He looked down into its pages once he'd grabbed it, before he'd even thought to. And the strange writing, indecipherable to his eyes, began to move, to wiggle and move as the ink were alive. And while the 16-year-old Bach watched it all gather in the center of the page, he looked up sharply at the old man, who was no longer there. A black tendril of ink leaped out before he could move and struck him in the forehead while he was still trying to figure out where the old man went. And his reality was set afire. His consciousness burst into a great void of stars, each star seemingly familiar, and even as he concentrated on one, it seemed to draw close almost instantly, as if he traveled toward it at a speed far greater than that of light, without actually traveling. The star was not a star at all, though. It was another consciousness, one also attached to his soul. It was him, a mirror image, him from a different reality. It was an old man, yet vigorous, and he knelt before a child and spoke. "Arthur, you never know where a king might be in hiding, so be kind to all as they deserve." The old man sensed him and stood, his face lighting up in recognition, reaching out and touching Bach with a finger upon the same spot the ink had struck him, and he understood. This was him, and he suddenly was the man, knew his memories, his experiences, lived his life, and the magic he called upon was Bach's to command. Bach was Merlin, and Merlin was Bach, and then, just as a mirror from another, they knew one another as themselves. He found himself suddenly back in the void, but it was no longer a void as his understanding had grown. He saw a web, a complicated tangle of massive lines, as if a yarn factory had imploded, and he saw in it its entirety. The great mass always expanding and growing, and the infinite realities of all existence. He was looking down upon all of creation, after all. With understanding came the need of action. Every light was a point, and every point was another version of him, of Bach, maybe by another name or another profession, but it was attached to his soul, so it was him. And as he watched, every decision spun off new realities, and every imagining created new universes, all valid, all solid, all real. And Bach could jump them, could commune with those other parts of himself, to know them, to understand, and to them be his, from birth to death until they were ash. Some were wizards, some mages, some were scholars, some were clerics and magistrates, and some were scientists, but all of them cared about people, cared about protecting them. He explored all the loves, all the sins, all the hatreds, misconceptions, and prejudices, lusts, hopes, everything. He was all of them, all at the same time, and all valid in the consciousness of one man. He knew not how long he took, but finally when he fell upon his knees, he was no longer young, but old, wizened, and wearing the same loose-fitting, second-hand tactical shirt and pants he had been forced to put on when they had taken him in the night. He turned to look for the man who had been in the room. However, he was gone, purposely and not really exploring anything. He held out his hand toward the old and gnarled tree root that had broken through the stonework above his head. It grew and writhed and finally broke off, providing the man with a long wooden staff. Bach then waved his hand again, and his clothes changed into soft brown functional robes. Stepping from the room, he came to face with a nightmare. A black cloud with a skeletal form and skull-like head hovered before the exit. "So thee has been chosen," it growled in many voices. "Seems that way," Bach said with a snark. "Perhaps you'd like to just step aside. I'd hate to be late for my first appointment, you see. The archive serves thee. Thou hast not the capacity in thine limited mortal mind." The robed man rolled his eyes. "I have an infinite capacity, for my mind is a mind of infinite realities." A skeletal hand raised slowly, and then a black fire shot forth to engulf the old man, who had been but a boy when he'd entered the room. The black fire didn't just burn, it ate like a miasma, leaching the health and vitality from his very bones as it even burned his flesh. "You have not the will to control the archive," the voices cried in satisfaction. Bach slashed his left hand gripping the staff hard, and fire slowed, then stopped, as the wizard's robe and flesh mended themselves in almost an instant. Thou hast not the power to use these whole. What thee now holds in thy mind, the figure cried, making one last attempt to stop the wizard from leaving. Do I not? Bach asked, smiling through his snow-white beard, and waved the staff with both hands, great blue-white light shining from its top before him. I cast thee out, foul beast, servant of the dark. I cast thee from this realm, from this reality back to the deep. In the name of the Creator, I cast thee out. The being snarled as it glided forth, but when it came into contact with the blue wizard's light, it shattered into 1,000 crows and ravens and blackbirds, flocking out of sight, dissipating into the darkness and into nothingness. Well now, I kind of like that, he said, looking at his staff in his left, and then to find out what was broken in existence. What would mandate the necessity to make someone like him? What problem was there to solve? His transformation was no random event. It was a bulwark. A defense against what, though, he knew not. The archive in his mind gave him an answer, and he slashed his reality with the staff and stepped through a doorway into another. And so a general has been summoned to fight those creatures in the night, in the dark. Until next time, Lux Fini, fear the night.